the Hyena of Auschwitz. She was young, blonde, and always smiling. Prisoners said she looked like a movie star, until she beat them bloody for dropping a potato peel. They called her the Hyena of Auschwitz, not because she killed quickly, but because she seemed to enjoy watching people suffer, slowly. After the war, she didn't run. She didn't beg. She didn't show a flicker of remorse. And when the noose was placed around her neck, she looked the executioner dead in the eyes, and said something so disturbing, he never forgot it. This is not just a story of war. This is a story of cruelty wearing a human face, and the brutal end that finally caught up with it. The girl who became a monster. She wasn't born a killer. She was born on a quiet farm. But Nazi Germany had a way of twisting the ordinary into something unrecognizable. Her name was Irma Ida Ilse Grese. Born in 1923 in the countryside of Mecklenburg, Germany, she grew up in a world marked by hardship, obedience, and nationalist propaganda. Her father was a dairy worker. Her mother took her own life when Irma was just 13, drinking hydrochloric acid in a fit of despair. That wound never healed. But the world she was growing up in offered a dark kind of salve. Indoctrinated by the Reich. As a teenager, Irma joined the League of German Girls, the female branch of the Hitler Youth. There, she was taught that obedience was virtue, that Jews were subhuman, and that loyalty to the Führer was more sacred than loyalty to family. She dropped out of school at 15, tried to become a nurse, but failed. And when she turned 18, the Nazi regime found a place for her. A place where young women were trained not to feel, trained to be cold. Irma applied to become an SS guard, what the Nazis called an Aufseherin, a female overseer in the concentration camps. She was accepted. Her training was brief, barely a few weeks. But in that time, she learned what the Reich expected. No sympathy, no hesitation, no questions. Prisoners are not people, she was told. They are enemies of the state. Tools. Vermin. The path to Auschwitz. She started her career at Ravensbrück, the notorious women's concentration camp. But her cold efficiency, her eagerness to punish, it got her noticed. In less than a year, she was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where she would become one of the most feared figures in the entire camp. And still, she was only 20 years old. A mask of beauty, a mind of cruelty. Survivors said she wore perfume, styled her blonde hair, and strutted through the camp like a fashion model on a runway of corpses. She carried a whip, a pistol, and a smile that never reached her eyes. One survivor later said, she looked like a doll, until she started laughing as she beat a woman unconscious. Becoming the hyena. It wasn't long before the prisoners had a name for her. The Hyena of Auschwitz. Not because she attacked like a wild animal, but because she enjoyed it, laughed at it, fed off it, and what she did inside those fences was only the beginning of the horror. The female sadists of the SS. They were women, mothers, daughters, secretaries. But inside the camps, they became monsters in skirts. When we think of the Holocaust, we often picture male SS officers, cold, uniformed, shouting orders behind barbed wire. But what many don't realize is that some of the worst cruelty came from women. Trained, armed, and just as vicious as the men. Irma Grese wasn't the only one. But among them, she stood out. Who were these women? They weren't soldiers. Most were recruited from everyday life. Housewives, factory workers, nurses, secretaries. Many joined for steady pay. Others, for a sense of power they'd never had before. The Nazis taught them that brutality was duty, and kindness was treason. Irma's rise through terror. In Auschwitz, Irma Grese quickly rose in rank, eventually becoming senior warden over thousands of female prisoners. She ruled with a whip in one hand and a German shepherd on a leash. Survivors say she whipped women across the breasts until they collapsed, unleashed dogs to rip apart prisoners for sport, selected women and children for the gas chambers, carried out beatings with glee, even as her victims screamed. One woman recalled, She laughed while dragging a girl by the hair across the gravel. The girl had fallen while carrying bricks. Irma broke her nose and walked away smiling. Another testified. She made us stand naked in the cold for hours. If someone fainted, she'd whip them awake. Beauty as a weapon. Irma's appearance shocked new prisoners. They expected monsters. They found a 22-year-old woman with flawless skin, long blonde hair, and polished boots. Some thought she might help them. But her beauty was a mask. She used it to disarm, to humiliate, to control. She liked making you beg, one survivor said. It made her feel godlike. The selections. Perhaps the most chilling part of her cruelty? The selections. When trains arrived, and the prisoners were herded onto the platform, Irma would point. Left, forced labor. Right, gas chamber. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't care if you were sick, old, or a child clutching your mother's hand. And afterward, she'd return to her quarters, as if she'd just finished a shift at a factory. The power trip. What did she get from all this? Everything. Power over life and death. Status among the SS. Fear that followed her like perfume. But what no one knew was this. The same cruelty she used to rise would one day drag her to the gallows. Auschwitz, where she earned her name. She didn't command an army. She didn't build gas chambers. But every prisoner in Auschwitz knew her name and feared the sound of her boots. By the time Irma Grese fully settled into her position at Auschwitz-Birkenau, she had become a living symbol of terror. Not just among the prisoners, but even among the other guards. Because unlike others, Irma didn't just follow orders. She seemed to enjoy them. The daily cruelty. Every day, Irma Grese walked through the women's barracks. She wasn't there to inspect. She was there to punish. Prisoners were beaten for talking, for crying, for not standing up fast enough. One woman recalled. She walked with a whip and a grin. She said, "Smile, or I'll beat one into you." She lashed prisoners for wearing makeshift shoes made from torn rags. She beat pregnant women until they lost their babies. She made inmates watch as their friends were ripped apart by dogs. The dogs. Irma's 2 German shepherds were more than pets. They were weapons. She trained them to attack on command, and sometimes with no command at all. One survivor said. She loosened the leash and smiled as the dog tore into the woman's arm. Then she laughed and walked away. She often fed them better than the prisoners. The gas chamber selections. But the most horrifying task she took on was selecting women and children for extermination. Survivors watched her walk the ramp after the trains arrived. She would point her riding crop left or right, as if choosing outfits, not lives. One survivor recounted. A mother begged her to spare her daughter. Irma asked how old she was. 10, said the mother. Irma pointed her to the gas chamber and said, "She won't be 10 tomorrow." Witness to death. Even in a place like Auschwitz, where death was routine, Irma stood out. Prisoners nicknamed her the Blonde Beast, the Angel of Death's Mistress. But one stuck forever, the Hyena of Auschwitz. Why hyena? Because she laughed. Because she fed off fear. Because she hunted the weak. She had no rank, but in the eyes of prisoners, she held the power of life and death. Her smile was the last thing many saw. Prisoners said the most haunting thing about her was her smile. Not a wicked grin, not a snarl, a calm, indifferent smile, as if nothing in Auschwitz fazed her. And for many victims, it was the last human face they saw. The fall of the Reich and the final days at Belsen. The empire of death was collapsing. The Nazis were running. But Irma Grese wasn't done hurting people, not yet. By late 1944, the Allies were closing in. The Eastern Front was collapsing under Soviet fire. And Auschwitz, the deadliest place on earth, was being evacuated. The Nazis called it a transfer. In truth, it was a death march. The Death March. As Soviet troops approached Auschwitz in January 1945, the SS scrambled to hide what they'd done. They forced tens of thousands of prisoners, starving, barefoot, and freezing, to march through the snow toward other camps. Many collapsed from exhaustion. Those who fell were shot. Irma Grese didn't just follow orders. She led women on these marches. With her whip in hand, she forced them forward, over ice, snow, and blood. Bergen-Belsen, the final hell. Greece's next destination was Bergen-Belsen, another concentration camp, located in what is now Germany. But when she arrived, what she saw wasn't order. It was collapse. Starving prisoners lay in piles. Bodies rotted in the open. Typhus had broken out, spreading like wildfire. There was no food, no water, no medicine. But Irma, she still wore her boots polished. She still carried her whip. And she still enforced brutal punishments, even as the world crumbled around her. A portrait of horror. When British soldiers liberated Bergen-Belsen in April 1945, they were greeted with a nightmare. Over 13,000 corpses rotting in the camp. Survivors so thin, they were mistaken for skeletons. A stench so powerful, soldiers vomited before entering. And in the middle of it all, Irma Grese, standing calmly in uniform, as if nothing was wrong. Captured on camera. The British arrested Grese on the spot. They photographed her, interviewed her, and listened, stunned, as she denied any guilt. She claimed she was just doing her duty. That she had never personally killed anyone. That the prisoners were liars. But the survivors remembered her. And the evidence was overwhelming. Awaiting judgment. While other Nazis fled or took their own lives, Irma Grese waited. She had no remorse, no fear. One British soldier wrote, "She was like a statue, cold, unmoved, and proud. But justice was coming. And when it came, it would make her the youngest woman ever executed under British law in the 20th century. The Belsen trials, facing justice. She walked into the courtroom like it was a fashion show. But she was there to answer for thousands of screams, and the blood that stained her hands." In September 1945, just months after Bergen-Belsen's liberation, the British began the Belsen trials, one of the first major war crimes prosecutions in modern history. Sitting in the dock were 45 defendants, SS officers, guards, doctors, and among them, Irma Grese. She was just 22 years old. The woman on trial. Grese wore her hair in braids. Her cheeks were rosy. Her expression, calm and detached, even as photos of dead bodies were shown to the courtroom. One journalist wrote, "She looked more like a schoolgirl than a killer." But the survivors knew better. Survivor testimonies. One by one, the witnesses stood. Their voices trembled, but their memories were crystal clear. A woman who lost her sister to Grease dogs. A girl who was whipped unconscious for collapsing. A mother who watched Grease laugh while children were marched to the gas chambers. "She beat us for looking at her," one woman said. "She beat us for breathing too loud." Another recalled, "She said I was too weak to work. She pointed at me and said, 'You go, gas.'" Her defense, "I was just following orders." Grease claimed, "She never personally killed anyone. She was merely a low-ranking guard. She was trained to obey, nothing more." But the court didn't buy it. Too many stories. Too much consistency. Too many broken bodies. And above all, her lack of remorse. Cold. Proud. Unmoved. Even under cross-examination, Grese never flinched. One reporter wrote, "She answered questions about death and torture as if reciting a grocery list." She denied selecting prisoners for gassing, but couldn't explain why so many witnesses said the same thing. She denied beating anyone, but the scars told another story. And when asked if she regretted anything, "No," she said, "I was doing my duty." The sentence. On November 17, 1945, the verdict was read. Guilty of war crimes, of torture, of murder. Irma Grese was sentenced to death by hanging. And in that moment, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply nodded, as if she expected it all along. Execution at 22. The end of the hyena. Most prisoners died screaming. Irma Grese, the Hyena of Auschwitz, faced death like a ghost. And what she said in her final moment haunted the man who killed her. December 13, 1945. Hameln Prison, Germany. It was just after dawn. Cold. Silent. 3 women were set to hang that morning, all convicted SS guards. But the youngest of them, by far, was Irma Grese, just 22 years old. The night before, in her final hours, Grese sat alone in her cell. No visitors, no family, no priest. She refused to confess, refused to write a last letter. She slept for a few hours, then woke, dressed herself, and waited. A British officer said. She was calm, mechanical, as if this were just another routine. The walk to the gallows. At 9:30 a.m., the guards arrived to escort her. Grese wore a light blue sweater, neatly pressed slacks, and her hair in long braids, just like she wore it at Auschwitz. As she stepped toward the execution chamber, her face showed no fear. Not a tremble, not a tear, just cold defiance. The British executioner was Albert Pierre Point, the most experienced hangman in Europe. He had executed hundreds of Nazis. But Irma was different. Her final words, as she stood on the trapdoor, with the noose being tightened around her neck, Pierre Point asked, "Do you have any last words?" Irma Grese looked him straight in the eye and said, "Schnell, quickly, no apology, no remorse, no fear." And with that one word, she dropped the executioner's account. Later, Albert Pierre Point would recall, she died as she had lived, without emotion. There was nothing behind her eyes. I've hanged men twice her age who cried like children. She didn't flinch. The girl who had laughed while others screamed, left this world in silence, the youngest woman executed. Irma Grese became the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. But her youth couldn't save her, because the crimes she committed, the sadism, the indifference, the delight in pain, were far older than she was. She thought she would be remembered for her looks. Instead, she became a symbol of how cruelty can wear the face of a girl next door. Legacy of horror, remembering the victims. Her name is infamous. But this story isn't about her. It's about the women who never came home, and the ones who still woke up screaming, decades later. Irma Grese's trial and execution made headlines across the world. Not because she was powerful, not because she commanded armies, but because she was a young woman, and a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a uniform. Voices that refused to stay silent. Many survivors who testified against her had spent years in silence. Too broken, too afraid, too forgotten. But when she stood trial, they spoke. She took my sister. She laughed when we bled. She whipped us just to hear us cry. One survivor said, "She killed my body in 1944. She killed my sleep every night after." The cost of survival. Some women who lived through Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen never told their families what really happened. Not because they forgot, but because they never stopped hearing the screams. Irma Grese may have been executed, but the scars she left outlived her by decades. The psychology of a sadist. What turned a dairy farmer's daughter into a war criminal? Was it brainwashing, sadism, ambition, or was it something more terrifying? That inside every ordinary person, there's a line that, if crossed, never comes back. Irma didn't cross it overnight. She was trained to be cruel, and she chose to enjoy it. Why her story still matters. Irma Grese was just one of many Nazi guards, but her case remains infamous because it forces us to ask, how does evil hide behind beauty? How many others went unpunished? And how close are we to becoming monsters when we're told it's just the rules? A reminder and a warning. Her life is not a cautionary tale about Nazis alone. It's a mirror, one that shows how ordinary people become executioners, and how apathy turns into atrocity. She looked harmless, but her soul was a graveyard. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. The hyena is gone, but the silence she left behind still screams. Irma Grese's story doesn't end on the gallows. It lingers in the nightmares of the survivors, in the black and white photos of the camps, in the hollow eyes of those who made it out alive, but never truly escaped. No tombstone for the hyena. She was buried in an unmarked grave. No flowers, no mourners, no memory, except in history books, and in pain. The woman who once strutted past corpses like they were weeds, vanished into the same soil she once walked over like a queen. The face of evil is not always ugly. Irma didn't look like a monster. She smiled. She wore perfume. She was only 22. But that's the point. Sometimes, evil doesn't come with horns or bloodshot eyes. Sometimes, it comes with a braid and a smile. Why we must remember. Not to glorify her. Not to feed the myth. But to remember. What happens when obedience replaces morality? What happens when pain becomes routine? What happens when we look the other way, because it's easier than speaking up? If this story gripped you, if it left you shaken or awakened, hit that subscribe button, because we bring the hidden truths to light. Comment below. Do you believe someone like Irma was born evil, or made into it? And share this video, because some stories should never be forgotten. In memory, this video is dedicated not to Irma Grese, but to her victims. The ones who never got justice. The ones whose names we'll never know, but whose suffering will not be erased.